Okay, welcome everybody. It's a real pleasure to have you all here. It's gonna be a very lively and I would say dense session today. We have Nate Hagens with us, and I personally feel lots of appreciation and gratitude for having this container with all of you and having Nate today with us. This is part of a broader series, and I'm gonna just quickly pull out a slide here to share with you what's the context behind it. We are meeting around the series called Pathways for the Future, and this is a very beautiful collaboration between Changemaker Exchange and IC Berlin, and we are bringing together different beautiful humans who are trying to make sense of the world right now and who are inviting a deeper dialogue around where are we, what's going on, how can we all show up in our communities to make sense of the complexity and beauty to a large extent of it all, but it feels intense at times, right? So this series is meant to invite dialogue and sense making. So we hope that, this is something that resonates with the way you are showing up today as well and how you arrive in this conversation. We have today with us Nate Hagens, and the topic is around the energy realities behind social change, what we actually need to know and look at. Of course, if you know Nate and if you've been following his work already, you have a sense that this is going to be quite a systemic take on this topic. And maybe just to briefly introduce Nate to all of you, I think it's more than 20 years that Nate has been exploring the relationships between energy, ecology, economy, human behaviors, and more recently, maybe technology. So there's a lot there that he's holding. At the same time, in my understanding, he's one of the most humble people out there, like with a super sharp mind, holding a lot of the bigger picture and the systemic understanding, at the same time holding a lot of humility and curiosity and openness to both understand things from multiple lenses and at the same time work on himself and his own reality. So I personally feel very humbled and very energized to bridge between our worlds and have Nate come here. And maybe just to clarify a bit how today is gonna look like, Nate is gonna dive right in. He has quite some slides. You don't have to stress about it. You can just settle down, listen in, slow down, and take everything in. We are going to share the slides, and you'll also have the recording, so you'll be able to go at your own pace through these different elements. And then after something like 50 minutes or so, we are going to open it up for Q&A. If in the meantime you already have questions, you can drop them in the chat. And when we open up the Q&A, we'll actually start from there. So I'll stop for now and invite Nate to take us forward from here. Thank you, Nate, and welcome.
Thank you. Great to see you all. It is calls like this that remind me that this is a human story. Well, it's also a more than human story. But there are people in all different countries and facets of the world, and this is a collective predicament for humanity in the biosphere. And a lot of my audiences are in North America, so it's wonderful to see people from all different countries around the world. I have a podcast called The Great Simplification, which has around 200,000 subscribers, but only 40% of those are in the United States. So we have like over 90 countries have people that follow the podcast. So today I am going to give a whirlwind overview of what I refer to as the human predicament. And per Karina's suggestion, I want to focus on energy as something that our culture and our economic system kind of ignore. And it's going to have great implications for our current trajectory and our future. So as she said, I'm going to have quite a few slides. I will go fast, but I don't want to talk just about energy, but I have to include how other things fit together in a systems view. And hopefully there'll be time at the end for questions. So the talk's going to be a brief introduction. I'm going to talk about the human ecosystem, the economic superorganism, implications and scenarios for our world, and what to do at various scales. So in order to change and be change makers for the future of our world, we have to take an aerial view and kind of understand what's happening. We have to diagnose the patient. And right now, the patient is not only human society, but our biosphere. And there are common narratives in our world. There's two predominant narratives: Green New Deal, migrate energy system to 100% renewable energy and work towards net zero, and everything else kind of falls into place. Or the business as usual narrative. There's nothing wrong with our past models or descriptions. There's no shortages of anything. We just need to deregulate and reduce taxes, and everything will be fine. So what I'm going to present today is a systems synthesis of our human situation, which tells a different story, different implications, different what to do's than these other stories. So if you take an aerial view of all the different issues in the world, finance and economics and climate change, what we notice is that we have lots of experts in the world that are really articulate and charismatic and fluent in their thing, but they rarely see how their thing fits together with all the other things. So in our cultural stories, in the news, in the media, in politics, we often have islands of expertise separated by oceans of nonsense or incoherence. And what this talk is going to do is stretch from narrow boundary thinking to wide boundary thinking, from things to connections, from linear to circular, from silos to emergence, from parts to wholes, from analysis to synthesis, and from isolation towards relationships. So you know about natural ecosystems. We are part of the human ecosystem, where we have ideas and we turn those into technology and innovation. But the way we do that is we combine materials and energy from the natural world and create technology and products. And we measure the value of those things and circulate it with money, dollars or euros or rupees. And the whole thing is in order to generate feelings, and the whole thing produces waste. So I'm going to briefly talk about all these things, but particularly spend some time on this part of it, the biophysical macroeconomic overview of our current global economy. So the first topic is energy. So we need energy for every single thing that contributes to GDP in the world. There is no exception. We need energy to mine and refine and deliver and run and repair and dispose of every single thing in the global economy. I live in the United States. This is, of course, not true everywhere in the world, but the average home in the United States has over 60 things, 60 pieces of technology that are plugged in 24/7, drawing electricity. Actually, even when they're turned off, that is about 12% of our electricity is just from having things plugged in. We're in a sea of energy services, and we don't look at the energy, we just look at the things and the convenience and comfort that they give us. So this is a picture of me on my farm, and my horse and my utility vehicle and my truck. My horse on a good day can do the work of one horse if I give her treats and such. On a really good day, I could do the work of 1/10 of a horse. But with some gasoline, my little utility vehicle can do the work of 45 horses, and some diesel fuel, which also comes from oil, my truck can do the work of 300 horses. So 1 barrel of oil has 5.7 million BTUs worth of energy, which if you translate that into work potential, it's around 1,700 kilowatt hours of work. And any of us on this call working a full day outside manual labor generate around 0.6 kilowatt hours worth of work. So it takes an average human being almost 5 years of manual work to generate the same energy potential that we get in 1 barrel of oil, which today costs around $60 in the open market. Also, the next time you're flying somewhere across the sky, imagine 100,000 invisible horses worth of energy pulling that plane. That is the power and density that we get from fossil hydrocarbons. And at 4.5 years per barrel, the global economy, all the countries in the world per year, added up together, use around 100 billion barrel of oil equivalents of coal, oil, and natural gas. So in effect, we have close to 500 billion human worker equivalents added to our global economy with around 5 billion real human workers. We don't think about this. So this underpins the story of industrialization, where we added huge amounts of incredibly cheap fossil energy to machines to replace what humans used to do manually or with draft animals. And this is a little bit of a complicated story, but it's our graph. It's really relevant to our future. So I live in Wisconsin, which is a dairy state, and I notice that some of you are from Germany and elsewhere. We milk cows, and back in the day, we would milk a cow by hand. It would take 30 minutes to milk the cow. And conceptually, that worked out to $5 an hour in this model in wages. But then we have these equipment, and there's an intermediate parlor technology where there's these automated milking machines, and the wages or the profits or reduced price of milk go up 4 times to $20 an hour. That's because we've added 180 times more energy embodied in the machines, and only takes 5 minutes per human to milk a cow. And then there's some fully automated systems that only needs 1 or 2 minutes per human, and the rest is fully done by robotic cow milking equipment. That also increases the wages or profits or reduces the price of milk. This is the story of lots of processes in the world where we add fossil energy combined with machines to do this work, and it results in lots of changes to our economic system. Now, what happens when we increase the price of energy? Well, in the hand milking example, where you're milking a cow by yourself, there's no change when price of energy goes up. In the intermediate technology example, going from the green, which is 5 cents per kilowatt, to the blue, which is 10 cents, a doubling, or the red, a tripling in energy prices, there's a little bit of a reduction in profits. But when you go to the processes and technologies in the world that are very energy dependent, that need a lot of energy input, a doubling or tripling in prices has massive implications. A doubling of prices eliminates most of your profits, and a tripling of prices actually means you're operating at a loss. And this explains what happened in Europe, in Germany, after early on in the Ukraine war. It's been modified a little bit since then, but we've built systems that are incredibly sensitive to the price of energy. But in a long-term perspective, what this has done in the last century is it's increased wages. And again, this is a global story, and these things aren't distributed equally, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But as a species, it has increased wages, increased profits, lowered the price of goods, and it's increased economic growth and the number of people. The population, coincident with this vast increase in coal, oil, and natural gas, is increased to over 8 billion people. And the global GDP per capita is also vastly increased in the last century. And if you combine these two graphs, the human economy measured by GDP, which is population times consumption, is 1,000 times bigger than it was 500 years ago. I have an MBA in finance, and I worked on Wall Street, and financial economic people don't understand this. They think that energy is just another commodity that we add to our economic system, and energy's value is its cost. So if a barrel of oil costs $60, that's its value to our economic system. However, $1,000 worth of oil or coal or gas is vastly more valuable than $1,000 worth of bike helmets or cupcakes or vitamins or eyeglasses or such. So our economic textbooks still today teach what's called a circular economic model, where households, people, like things, demand things, and they send a signal to firms, and then firms develop things, and it's called the circular economic model. This model neglects the source of most of the things, which is our low entropy, non-renewable natural resources, especially energy, and it ignores the sink, which is the growing waste absorption capacity of the biosphere. So our culture conflates the dollar value of what energy costs with the work value that it provides. And for the most part, we don't include the cost of pollution at all in our defense, nor do other species. So we are energy blind. We think it's technology and money that are powering the world, but it's really energy and non-renewable materials and ecosystem services that are the real wealth powering things. So if you zoom out to a 20,000 year aerial view, we are all alive somewhere during the middle of what one day might be referred to as the carbon pulse, which is this very brief period in Earth's history and human history where we're drawing down ancient sunlight millions of times faster than Mother Earth trickle charged it in the form of oil and gas and coal reservoirs. If you zoom in a little bit to a 1,000-year vantage point, it looks something like this. And we're all alive somewhere between the yellow and the red star on this graph. From a climate change and global heating perspective, we hope we're closer to the red star because we're running out of absorption capacity in the oceans and the biosphere. From an economic convenience and comfort and stability standpoint, we hope we're closer to the yellow star because this stuff, these 500 billion strong armies of helpers power this Zoom call as one example. Okay, so how much energy is left? This is a graph of US oil production. And you might think, drill, baby, drill. Technology overcame any resource limitations. But here's the same graph broken out by different provinces. The green is the conventional lower 48 states. The yellow is the North Slope of Alaska, which is part of the United States, but not contiguous. It's a different geologic province. And the blue is offshore oil, which is in the Gulf of Mexico, under the sea. And the red is tight oil, which is also called shale oil. And this is the source rock from which all the other oil migrated. There's nothing left after that. And it depletes quite rapidly. A new shale oil well will deplete at 80% in the first 18 months. This is a little bit of a complicated graph, but to back up the point I just made, the pink uh, under prior years shows all of the oil wells drilled in the United States before 2014 and how they're depleting, like how much their oil production declines over time. And then the orange is all the wells that were drilled in 2014, and then that decline profile, et cetera, building on top. So we're having to run faster and faster, drilling more and more in wells that are depleting faster and faster just to kind of maintain production. If the United States, which is the largest oil producer in the world, very close to Saudi Arabia and Russia, if we stopped drilling new wells today, our oil production would decline by 40% around in the first year and similar in the next year. We have to keep drilling to maintain this level of production. And this is a global story. This is a chart from BP showing the dark blue is our global oil supply. If we had no more investment, no more drilling, that's how rapidly it would decline. The pink is investing in enhanced oil recovery and other tech. And the light blue is these are new resources and projects that we need to develop in the world. And even with all that, there's not going to be more oil. It's going to be about the same for the next 30 years. And this is from, from BP. It's not from some fringe analysis. So what ends up happening is technology acts like a straw. It doesn't really increase the amount of resources. What it does is it widens the aperture of the straw so we get more out, and we're that much closer to the slurping sound at the bottom. Yes, it does find a little bit more resources that originally we couldn't access, but the majority of the influence of shale drilling, and I would argue all technology in the world, is it's accessing our real natural resource bank account faster. All right, what about other energy? Yeah, there's oil, there's coal, there's natural gas, but there's other kinds of energy. And this gets into energy fungibility, how exchangeable one type of energy is with another, and energy properties. First of all, when we talk about renewable energy, this is an oxymoron. Um, Renewable energy is not renewable, it's rebuildable. An oak tree is renewable if we have acorns. A chicken is renewable if there are other chickens. Solar panels and wind turbines are rebuildable. They have to be replaced every 20 or 25 years. They have complicated supply chains. Their technology is just as complicated as a pickup truck or an airplane. They are rebuildable technologies. The sun is renewable. Second point here is renewable energy is mostly electricity. So 80% of modern energy use in the world is not electricity. It's long-term trucking and shipping and flying and heat and other things. So there's a mismatch between rebuildable energy like solar, geothermal, with what our current system uses. And some of this can be switched. Some of it can be switched only at a high cost, and some of it can't be switched. Another point I would make here is the invisible but soon shrinking influence of the carbon pulse. We are so energy blind that we assume that this access to energy is kind of like a natural law, like gravity or sunrises or oxygen. But we've all been living during this upslope, taking this for granted. And technology and our whole society are going to have to do things differently on the downslope. There's still plenty of energy left, asterisk, with the exception of the climate and oceans, but it's going to be more costly and less available in the not too distant future. And this gets back to the point I made earlier is as energy becomes more costly, gradually or suddenly, it means that our processes and our arrangements in the world that are heavily dependent on technologies that require lots of energy inputs are going to have challenges. Also, one other note here, when we talk about oil, and I imagine many of you on this call rightly are concerned about global heating and the oceans and the biosphere, and we want to use less oil. Well, just switching to electric cars is not an answer here. Why? Because gasoline is only one of 6,000 products that's made from a barrel of oil. Gasoline is the largest product. It's around 40% of the barrel of oil. But there's butane and propane and diesel and jet fuel, plastics, medicines, paint, tires, all these things come from the precursors in a barrel of oil. So far, the energy transition does not exist. There has been no green revolution globally, only a green addition. So this graph shows on the bottom biomass in green, which we are now using more trees in the global economic system than we did before we found fossil fuels. Above that is coal in the brown, and then gas and oil, and renewable energy is the little slivers on top that are growing quite fast. They're growing faster than fossil fuels, but the entire system is also growing. Lastly is renewable energy is more efficient because there's not the waste when we generate the electricity, but biological systems maximize power, not energy or efficiency, and power is energy per unit time. So a tree doesn't maximize efficiency with one leaf that would get 100% photosynthesis, and it doesn't grow 1,000,000 leaves because then they would be shaded. It grows just the right amount of leaves to best access the sun's rays and energy. And so when we have to stop or slow our economic system, that means we get less neurotransmitters and less access to the time is money driver of our global economy. So there's a little bit of a mismatch in optimizing for efficiency or optimizing for energy. So briefly on materials, GDP and energy are incredibly tightly linked, like 99% correlation between GDP growing and energy growing. With materials, it's 100% correlation. So the orange line here is global GDP. The yellow line is the material footprint, which is an aggregate of energy and materials. And the blue line is CO2. And you can see that CO2 is largely correlated, but it's increasing at a slightly lower rate. And that's because we're growing renewables faster than fossil fuels. But the whole thing is incredibly tightly tethered to energy and material use. When we talk about materials like copper and lithium and things like that, the entire global technosphere of all the built things that humans have made, including skyscrapers and roads and asphalt and buildings and everything, weighs more than all living things on Earth right now. And not just animals, but grasses, trees, everything alive is outweighed by the technosphere. So switching to renewable energy, decarbonization is going to lead to rematerialization. A lot of the materials that the green revolution will require are located in areas already suffering from social and civic unrest, already suffering from higher wet bulb temperatures, and in places that don't really like the global north and west. And can you blame them? This is going to be a constraint if we try to decarbonize in a big way. This graph shows the red bars are the amount, the blue bars is the amount of copper that was produced in the country of Chile, which is the largest copper producer in the world. And the red bars show how much energy they needed to do it. So everything we do in the world will become more expensive if we cannot reduce the energy consumption of industrial process faster than prices grow. This is a real issue. Well, what about technology? Well, briefly about technology. Every single unit of GDP requires three things for sure: energy, materials, and some sort of information or technology. So there are two types of technology. Most technology is type 2, but type 1 is we find ways to use energy more efficiently, like a coal plant or a solar panel, or we found new energy sources, some like new technology that allows us to get geothermal out of the ground. But type 2 technology is all the things that humans do with gadgets and machines that we used to do manually. And it's this type 2 technology that dominates technology inventions, and then that ends up being a larger demand for energy in the subsequent period. So technology itself isn't an answer to the energy problems I'm laying out. Humans are innovators. We always have been, and we always will be. And so what we do is we make innovations, many of them at your former company, Bosch in Europe, where we get 1.2% more energy efficient as a species on average over the last 200 years. So that means that every dollar of GDP uses a little bit less energy. But if you extrapolate that onto our total energy consumption graph, there is a backfire effect that happens, is because we funnel those savings back into more consumption. If an air conditioner is developed that costs half the amount, well, that's great, but some people will buy two, and some people that couldn't afford one before will buy one, etc. So energy efficiency globally has increased approximately 36% in the last 35 years. But during that same time, energy consumption has increased by 63%. All right, briefly about money. Economics textbooks in our MBA programs and colleges around the world teach us that money is lent from existing capital. This is not true. The reality is that 80% of money is lent into existence when a commercial bank makes a loan to a person or a business. So with that in mind, let me look at a conceptual graph of human history. This shows that for a long time, humans relied on flows of sunlight and soil and earth to generate the things that humans needed, but there was a maximum capacity that could be reached by renewable flows. Then we added a different sort of graph, which is these non-renewable resources that eventually, over a long period of time, like whale oil and things like that, this is great, we add more of it, and it reaches a maximum, and then, the harder to find stuff is left, and we get after that. But eventually it forms a bell-shaped curve like this. And one day oil will look like that. But then our economic system overlays money that can be created by governments with a pen stroke or by commercial banks when people make a loan. And so we overlay this yellow curve on top. So with access to these incredibly powerful fossil fuels, the human economic system grew so fast and large in the last century that the early economists that included land and land productivity in the models, that no longer explained our wealth. So in economic classrooms and research, it became capital and labor. And using the social construct of credit, we continue to pull resource consumption forward in time. The United States continues to, and many countries in the world continue to go to debt to not tighten our belts, but we don't want to tighten our belts, so we borrow more money. Well, all money is a claim on energy and resources. So now our society views the world through a financial lens. We've not only financialized the human experience, but also the stories about it and the explanation of it. So it's important to keep in mind that as we create more and more money and more debt, all of that debt will sometime in the future have to be paid back with energy. But our energy and our ores and our functioning ecosystems and our dolphin populations and the birds in India and all the other things, those aren't increasing. So we're creating more and more financial claims on a static on human timescales amount of natural resources. Okay, so real briefly on pollution. Um, you all know this story. I'm not going to really get into it, but in addition to climate, we've lost over 70% of the populations of animals, birds, fish, et cetera, since I've been on this planet. What a, I've said that thing 100 times, and every time I say it, I still feel a little upset by it. We have plastics and endocrine disrupting chemicals and reduction in testosterone and sperm count and all kinds of impacts that are not included in our prices and therefore are not included in our incentives. So yesterday, the United States and probably elsewhere in the world too, I don't show it, focus on it, stock market hit an all-time high. But the real stock market, which is measured by the health of ecosystems, planetary boundaries, animal, bird, fish, insect populations, is nowhere near all-time highs. It's declining sharply. Why do we do all this? We do it to get feelings. Humans are part of the web of life. We are a more recent part of the evolutionary tree, but we are related genetically to every other living creature on Earth. We share a common ancestor with and have a very high percentage of our DNA. So we are a product of what worked or what was preferred in the past. And so we go through our lives today in this unbelievably novel, supernormal stimuli smorgasbord of technology and experiences and inputs and Zoom calls, trying to match the emotional states of our successful ancestors via neurotransmitters, et cetera. Okay, so now I'm going to try to connect this human economic system into what's happening today, the wide boundary story. So some of you are in Africa and in Europe. In the United States, we have a bird called a starling. And starlings follow three simple rules. They do what your neighbor does, don't get too close, and fly towards the center. And you wouldn't think of it, but following those three simple rules, and we get the emergent property of these beautiful starling murmurations in the sky. Humans historically followed three simple rules. They coordinated in their tribe, they ate the surplus, and they did what was best for their tribal unit back in the day. Now, today we follow different rules. We coordinate as families, small businesses, corporations, nation states to generate surplus or profit or wages. We spend that surplus and we pursue culturally accepted behavior. And the emergent property of that is a phenomenon that I've been studying for the last 10 years. This is an aerial view of Fort Lauderdale in Florida in the United States, but it could easily be in many other places in the world. We have become this, not by our volition or our plans. The emergent property is we've become this globally interconnected, energy hungry superorganism. This is an aerial view of Los Angeles, and the brake lights and the headlights shown here are representative of hemoglobin passing through our arteries and veins of a human body. And the hemoglobin here is, of course, diesel, gasoline, and oil. So we have developed this six-continent just-in-time supply chain based on energy, which our system treats as a flow, but it's mostly a stock, which we're drawing down quite rapidly. And our culture keeps score of all this by GDP. And so the emergent effect here is not a murmuration, but global human culture is biologically, metabolically functioning as an energy dissipating structure, kind of a mindless superorganism going forward in time, led by the financial markets, that is stronger than uh, policy and politicians and billionaires. It just goes forward. So our global human metabolism can be seen in many different ways. The graph on the right was from one of my academic papers showing all the different prior climate meetings, and there's no dent in the CO2 graph from the atmosphere, and it correlates quite strongly with our energy consumption. And nature does not differentiate between humans and our machines. And the metabolism of our waste, Earth is being pushed beyond the limits of its regenerative capacity. We had 1 billion humans, um, 100 years ago. Metabolically, we have, 400 billion humans worth of work, but also the exhaust and the waste. Climate change does not care about nations. It doesn't care about anything. It just responds to the global amount of emissions and heat trapping gases in the atmosphere. And you can see that the global north has, in a switch to somewhat renewable electricity, has reduced some of their coal and natural gas use, but this net decrease has been more than made up by the net increase in the industrial factories of China, India, and elsewhere. So there is no one driving this bus, not politicians, not the rich and powerful. We have outsourced our wisdom to the financial markets. And trying to mitigate climate change within our current economic structure is kind of like arguing with a forest fire. All right, so power in an energetic sense is energy used per unit time, but it also has different meanings in a social context. And the story of power from this framing is 10,000 years ago, humans stopped nomadic hunter-gathering ways and gradually, starting with 7 different places around the world, started to stay in one place and intensively do agriculture, which created hierarchy and surplus and the need for warriors and priests and accountants and guards. And it was the beginning of the creation of hierarchy. On top of that, a couple centuries ago, we were farming horizontally in the land, and then we started to farm vertically, and we went underground and unlocked all these fossil armies. That also boosted the hierarchy and power in the world. And then we started to create monetary representations of this, which further um, put the power in a very small portion of humans and our systems. And now AI is accelerating this dynamic even further. So the superorganism, to use a Lord of the Rings Mordor metaphor, I think is kind of the Eye of Sauron in our situation. We're condensing more and more of humanity into this economic superorganism. But humans, individual humans on this call, this isn't us. Humans around the world are kind and generous and cooperative, and we just want good times with our friends and our family and have soup and a good nature experience and play with our dogs. But this economic superorganism is making humanity into this different aggregate structure. And this is our challenge. So under this framing, what is not likely to happen? Growing the economy and mitigating climate change and the sixth mass extinction. Growing the economy by replacing fossil fuels with renewables. Culture en masse choosing to leave these fossil armies in the ground, and governments embracing limits to growth well before their past. Under this framing, what is likely to happen? A growth in gross energy while the net energy declines, which means lots of things we will want to turn into energy, but it will take a lot of energy and resources to get them. Increased money creation and financial market support by central banks and governments. This is happening in my country and in many places around the world. Wider and deeper poverty, at least material poverty and inequality. AI is going to accelerate the energy and environmental constraints. Probably a rightward shift in politics, reduction in global environmental regulations because we're going to need to get the energy, and basically pedal to the metal until something breaks. So what are the implications and scenarios of this? So I've come up with four rough quadrants. One is the green growth scenario, where we use technology not only to have enough productivity to grow, but also enough to save the environment and such. The second category is what I call the Mordor economy, which we have to use more and more of our energy and materials are diverted to the energy and materials sector and to mitigate environmental problems. So this graph shows growth over the last 200 years. The first red line on the left was when Reverend Thomas Malthus said that the exponential growth of human demands would outstrip the linear growth of our food production. He was wrong because he didn't know about fossil fuels and how much they turbo boosted our agricultural supply from the Haber-Bosch process. And was that where the Bosch Institute is from? Probably is the same Bosch. Then we go to the 1960s when my colleague Paul Ehrlich wrote something about the population bomb, predicting similar things. He was wrong, at least about that, because he didn't know about globalization and outsourcing to the areas with the cheapest production, or about debt, where we've grown debt faster than we've grown our GDP in every single year since 1968. Then in 2008, we had the great financial crisis, where we kind of outsourced the role of commercial banks to central banks. We had the COVID situation where central banks and governments gained even more control. There may be another can to kick. There may be some other innovation on the horizon that we're allowed, enables us to extend growth a little longer. But it's this sort of can kicking, the Mordor economy. The third quadrant, the third possibility, is what I call, the name of my podcast is The Great Simplification, where we have a peak in global resource use and a decline, but the decline is informed and it is a kinder, gentler descent than the default path. And at some point, when we remove low productivity credit with a shift towards lower productivity energy and resources because they're more costly, and a return to solar inputs, which are very viable, we're going to have a retracement decline in economic growth. In my opinion, one of the next 2 or 3 recessions will be a depression, which I refer to as the Great Simplification. And then the fourth quadrant is Mad Max, and I don't need to describe that much. The challenge is that in our cultural narratives, the vast majority of people are speaking, planning, as if this green growth scenario was the primary future ahead of us. And these other scenarios aren't really talked about or considered much. Personally, I think the odds are more like this, and we need a lot more people talking about the second and third quadrants, which leads me to the 5 horsemen of the coming decade. One is we keep creating more and more financial claims on the same to declining underlying reality. Debt continues to grow exponentially, and this is a problem because we're papering over our problems with more and more credit, while the energetic material basis of our currencies is depleting. Also, we have geopolitics. There's many wars going on in the world, including a big one between United States and Europe and Russia. Now that you understand a little bit about how important oil is to the world, 2/3 of the world's exportable, purchasable oil comes through a 1 mile corridor in the Strait of Hormuz every day. And all the green dots and things here is between half and 2/3 of all the oil reserves remaining in the world are on this graph, which explains why there's so many military bases and such in this area. Complexity is a risk. We have a 6-continent just-in-time supply chain, which is predicated on cheap oil and available credit and global peace. The social contract is important. This is a graph in my country of the counties who voted for President Trump, shown in red, and for Vice President Harris, shown in blue. This was a recent survey in the United States showing an all-time disparity between Republicans and Democrats on how much are satisfied or dissatisfied with the way things are going in the United States. And originally I had 4 horsemen in this graph, but Karina, our host today, didn't let me forget the 5th, which is the ongoing climate disruption and ecological damages, which are not distributed evenly in the world, but many people are experiencing these things already. So I'm now going to briefly talk about 100 inferences and implications of this. No, I'm just kidding. I only have time for 17. So one is long-term growth was not the norm in our world. We're all alive during this incredibly unique exponential growth period. Modern economic theory was developed under this one-time set of circumstances in the red circle-ish, but there were long periods, even in the last 2,000 years, when growth was flat to declining for long periods of time. Number 2, cheap, abundant fossil fuel energy underpins our societies and our expectations. This is a stock which we've treated as a flow in our stories. Number 3, we've conflated the proximate drivers of progress and growth with the ultimate drivers. We talk about politics and technology and money as being the things that drive the human system, but all 3 of those things sit atop a largely invisible thing of energy that's powering our everyday lives. And that entire thing sits on a healthy biosphere, which is slowly but with increasing momentum, leaving the stability of the Holocene where our species evolved and thrived. As long as growing GDP is a global goal, better technology is going to tend to grow, not shrink our CO2 emissions and impact. So in my opinion, the real energy transition is not about swapping good energy out and getting rid of the bad. It's about relationships, our relationships with energy, our relationships with each other, our relationships with the natural world. That's the real energy transition. So under our current economic system, AI is going to act as a larger draw on energy and the environment. Barring some new boost in productivity, maybe from artificial intelligence, growth is likely soon over. And the first challenge is going to be responding to a financial calibration. A lot of my work talks about how do we bend and not break in that situation. Rather than choose austerity, governments and central banks are going to print and monetize debt, eventually leading to problems with our currencies and creating some systemic risks. Renewable energy, nuclear, technology, these are the right answers to the wrong question. The right question is, how do we live meaningful lives with using less resources and less damage to the biosphere? But right now, we're just looking to technology to keep things the way they are without facing these deeper questions. So there is a biophysical phase shift occurring in global politics, alliance, and agreements. Increasingly, Russia is pricing its oil in different currencies. The dollar as the global currency and the petrodollar is running into some headwinds. And this is all unfolding on a decadal scale, but these are big trends. Climate change is not the problem, but it's a symptom of a much larger dynamic. The story I'm talking about today cannot yet be voiced aloud in politics and media. It's too abstract, it's threatening, there aren't easy answers. This is a scene from the movie Don't Look Up, and I can empathize with what Leonardo DiCaprio was thinking, because this is a complicated story that is not going to make it on the news. And so it brings up something called cognitive dissonance, which Jared Diamond famously talked about in his book Collapse, that people that lived a couple miles downstream from a dam that was about to break were quite worried about it. And people that lived 1 mile downstream were incredibly worried about it. But people that lived right under the dam, they weren't worried about it at all, at least in their public interviews, because for them to be worried about the risk from this dam breaking would have verbalized lots of things that their identity and their built lifestyle and their job and all sorts of other things. So it was too painful to voice these things. So they suppressed them emotionally. And I think this is the mother of all cognitive dissonance, is this story, this human story. Democracies and open societies were highly correlated with this energetic surplus that lifted all or most boats on the way up. What sort of governance structures will apply on the way down? Our current resource and tech situation can power a great culture and civilization, probably not the one that we have right now. We do not face a resource shortage, but rather a longage of our expectations. On the upper left, that's me reading a book to my dog at night. These are my two best friends from college. The upper right is me, a picture when I was in Oroville, India, with some school children, learning about birds and meditation and song. And the best things in life, after basic needs are met, are mostly free. So the task now is to change the initial conditions of the future. None of us can solve all these challenges. No one can. But what we can do is together change the initial conditions so that in 5 years from now, some pathways are suddenly available that wouldn't have been. And then 5 years after that, new pathways emerge. And I think that is the work. This is a rite of passage moment for Homo sapiens, and we've been through many of them before, where the asks of the time are different than the conventions have led us to be. And this purple thing on the right is meant to represent something that comes after the economic superorganism, a cultural mitochondria of the thing that is not yet born. This is a story of no less than power versus life, and the story is not yet written. Okay, so what to do at various scales? Again, this next part of my presentation could be an hour presentation on its own, but I can't not talk about, at least directionally, what we could do. But what is the we, first of all? Rich, well-off countries and people, materially poorer countries and people, other species and ecosystems, the unborn of our species and other species. There's a lot of different categories of the we, which inform also the what to do. What do we do? Personal, individual change, community, local resilience, institutional, cultural, or government, or at the species level. And I'm just going to briefly speak to each of these categories. We have to remember that most of the science about humans and our societies, especially social science, has been developed during this incredibly anomalous period. And we have to keep that in mind when we think about solutions. So there are three distinct timelines for interventions, the red, the yellow, and the green. Right now, we have time while everything is kind of static, though evolving, before these crises arrive. There is going to be, in my opinion, a financial kind of whoosh moment in the next decade where our musical chair claims have a stair step down and the music stops kind of, and we're going to have to respond and bend, not break. And then what are we going to be living like 20, 30, 40, 100 years from now? What does that system look like? So we need people thinking about and integrating all three of these timelines. So, in my opinion, there is a road closed sign in the road ahead of our culture, and this rhymes with depending on what country you live in. And if you could imagine putting a time capsule there, if you squint and kind of agree with or understand what I've presented here, even if you only agree with 10 or 15% of what I've said, put that as a possibility in your probability distribution in your mind. What sort of things would you, in this safe and psychologically okay place, put into that time capsule? What sort of advice and recommendations? Well, first of all, there's global things. We're going to need global governance to avoid a nuclear war or a world war, because there will not be a fourth world war. And AI is going to somehow have to be reined in. And I've got a really scary podcast coming out in a few weeks on that with a guy named Nate Hagens. But we're going to have to change our governance structures. Incentives. We don't include the price of depletion or pollution in our main uh, um, prices in the world. And so we're going to have to include some wider boundary representations of reality in our prices and incentives. And so we could add a tax to all things that are non-renewable on human timescales, and that would make human labor and renewable energy much more competitive. It would also make things in the world much more expensive. Um, but this is one path that would biophysically make sense, but it would have to be met with different social contracts and universal basic income guarantees and such. Another category at the global level is what I refer to as advanced policy, which is the solutions to the things I'm talking about can't be politically discussed today because they're too unpopular or threatening, but we can discuss them maybe in your own projects at the change makers. Like, if this is somewhat true, what are the things that we're going to need to intervene in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, and start building research and models and constituency and plans for those things today. Institutionally, I think we need to head towards Goldilocks technology, away from the useless things like a drone delivering donuts to your 7-year-old's birthday party, and also away from Stone Age tech. We're going to need technology that is more respectful of the environment, has more local and regional inputs, simpler technology, things that apply to the Great Simplification, et cetera. We're going to have to do more nearshoring and bioregionalism because the six continent supply chain is somewhat fragile. So, especially for basic needs and important things, we're going to have to do things more based on the inputs from places around where we live. We're going to have rocks in the river, metaphorically, as the water starts rushing faster. People and communities that are untethered are going to tumble downstream. And I think one of the things we can do as individuals is be a rock in the river or build these structures in our communities that when the water rushes down, there are places to go to help people and the systems. And that's a whole nother presentation. And we're going to need like alternative governance. I mean, every community in the world has a town council and a mayor. But these things that I'm talking about today can't really be agreed upon or addressed. So there might need to be a shadow council somewhere in each of these settings that maybe not has the power politically, but they have the ability to do research and scenario planning. Culturally, we're going to need to change our aspirations. We are social primates and we look to others as to what is important and what brings us status. And we're constantly keeping up with the Joneses with more and more pecuniary material stuff. And we need more people recognizing that after basic needs are met, the best things in life are free. And we need to change what is approved and admired in our society. Through this all, we have to take a stand for the natural world and the species and the ecosystems that don't have a say in what's going on. And we need to take a stand and protect the sacred where we live. That's not a global story. That's a local, intensely local story, which is different for each of you on this call. We have to be ready for a simplification, and we need to simplify first and beat the rush in our families, in our communities, and start to be examples of this new cultural mitochondria that will replace this economic superorganism. And lastly, just some brief personal advice. I've cried more this year than I've cried in my entire adult life. Part of it is because one of my dogs died and another thing happened to me, but also I grieve for the world at times. And I think doing that grief work allows me to then be emotionally regulated and tackle all these things going on in the world. So we really need to take care of ourselves with healthy food and exercise and sleep and self-care. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to be agents of change and rocks in the river for the broader society. We have to generate skills. Right now, it's not skills like computer coding or some of the other things, but real actual skills. Ask yourself, what skill could I develop that where I could contribute to my community or my situation? And it might be something you are interested in and have never done. Very important, not to use another Lord of the Rings metaphor, is to find the others. You need to find other people, and maybe several of them are on this call and you know them already, that you can process and talk about these things. And maybe that's an intellectual thing. Maybe it's just a friendship and a fun thing. Or maybe you find some other people that are deeply on board with your own philosophy and ethic and want to play a role in our collective future. This is a picture of my co-author of my books, DJ White, who was the early founder of Greenpeace. And he went on to create earthtrust.org. And he's probably the single most effective environmental activist of our time. He saved dolphins from the star-kissed tuna. He negotiated dolphin-free tuna, and he stopped the drift net lines in the 80s and stopped dolphin drive kills and all kinds of things. He was A plus in service of life. I'm not. I strive to be B plus in service of life because I'm not perfect and I'm just a guy and I'm just directionally trying to help humanity in the biosphere. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to take a step in the direction of something that calls to us and our skills. So we have to do this simultaneously. This new future that we're change and change makers is trying to build out, simultaneous with the industrial growth-based ecosystem blind system that we're a part of. When a system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to lift the entire system to a higher order. That's what I'm trying to do with this work, is help inspire and create these islands of coherence around the world to change the initial conditions of the future. Thank you.